Hello and welcome back to What's Mili Making, where I'm Mili and this is a space where I talk about the past, present, and future of my making, mostly knitting. At the end of today's episode, which is Knitting Podcast Episode 6, I will talk a little bit about my sewing. So over the past few weeks, I have been a mostly monogamous knitter. I have one project that got a lot of my focus on and I finished it. The pros of being a monogamous knitter for me are, I guess, that my projects are not lingering on the needles for months on end. But the cons are I kind of miss the being able to work on a variety of projects, and also when I hyper focus on a project, once that period of hyper focus is over, I just kind of lose all steam in that project. I don't really want to work on it anymore. And going forward in the next few weeks, I'm going to try to get back into my old habit of mixing up the projects I'm working on. Without further ado, let's get into my one proper finished object. And that is the Metropolitan Pullover by Toriu. So this was a test knit and I'm really happy with my finished object. So this is a top-down contiguous sleeve sweater. I feel like I talk about contiguous sleeve construction in every single episode, so just take that as a sign that I really enjoy it. And what I say is that the contiguous sleeve construction kind of mimics the natural shape of your body. So if you find that other sweater constructions like circular yokes, raglans, drop shoulders, if you find that it causes a lot of excess fabric bunching up in your underarm that you don't like, I would recommend checking out a contiguous sleeve construction, because I find that is less the case with this sort of sweater. And if you've never tried a contiguous sleeve sweater, I would highly recommend this as your first entry into this sweater construction variation, because it's a very well written pattern, easy to follow, totally beginner friendly. You do a little bit of neck shaping flat, but you quickly join in the round, and then the whole sweater is basically knit in the round. So I actually cropped mine quite a bit. I put the exact amount in my Ravelry project notes, but basically I always say that I'm going to super crop a sweater so that I can wear it over dresses and skirts, but when I see how small it looks, I kind of chicken out and I just keep knitting. And I'll have sweaters that are cropped enough to wear with high-waisted pants, but not cropped enough to wear with high-waisted skirts. With the length of my torso, I don't know if this is a universal thing, but where I wear high-waisted skirts sits different than where I wear high-waisted pants. So the length of tops that I wear with different bottoms that are high-waisted differ. So this is the first cropped sweater that I've made that really properly is a good length for my high-waisted skirts, and I could not be happier. The finishes on this sweater are very clean and simple. You do I-cord finishes all around, and I found a really nice tutorial on YouTube on how to graft the last 3 stitches when you're knitting an I-cord in the round, and I just think the finish looks very clean. And I linked that in my Ravelry project notes, and I'll probably also link it below. With the neckline, yeah, there's no I-cord on the neckline, but it matches the vibe of the I-cord, so it totally works. The other design detail in this sweater is that there are eyelets at every increases. Alas, I realized halfway through the yoke that I was twisting my eyelets incorrectly, so I didn't get those nice open eyelet detail. But I still do have a little bit of it going on. It's just not as big as if I twisted the yarn in the correct orientation. But even with my improper eyeletting, I like the way the sweater looks a lot. So this is another sweater that is knit with relatively thin yarn on relatively large needles. So you do use 6mm needles with a strand of fingering and a strand of lace weight, and you are supposed to get a 16 stitch gauge. I think mine did block out to be slightly looser, but not, it was maybe half a stitch off, so my final dimensions were pretty close to what they were supposed to be. This is actually the second sweater that I've knit this summer, that I've knit ever, where it has this sort of yarn and needle combination. And I think the most famous version of this is the Lento sweater from Lina magazine. I don't remember which volume, but that one kind of, I think, popularized this style where you are able to knit a sweater with a relatively little amount of yarn. Yeah, that's the sweater that kind of started this whole thing. So earlier this summer, in my last podcast episode, I talked about it. I knit the California sweater by Knit California, which is another test knit, and the pattern is still not released. I know I did say I would talk about it more in this episode, but because the pattern release will time better with my next podcast episode, I will actually talk about it in that episode. And if you want to already hear what I talked about, you can watch the last episode. Anyhow, so both of these sweaters are knit on 6mm needles with the lace weight and the fingering weight yarn to create a nice open gauge. And just how loosey-goosey your fabric looks is definitely going to be dependent on which specific yarn you picked. Like I was talking about my yarn combination in that episode. So my California sweater, I used a Surrey and a very airy Corriedale yarn. And I think that fabric is definitely more dense. It's not a dense fabric as is, but relatively dense in comparison to the yarn combination that I used for this sweater. And I like them both. That's just something to consider if you are knitting this sort of pattern. And actually, because I've knit these two, I've kind of been thinking, should I just knit the Lento so I can like compare all three of them? Or am I just happy with these two patterns, which I am, and I do prefer contiguous sleeve and a drop shoulder over a raglan. Maybe I just shouldn't knit the Lento and be happy with the two patterns that I do have that were inspired by it, I guess. Also, if you do want to see kind of like a compare and contrast of the California sweater and this Metropolitan Pullover, do let me know. I can, I guess, include that when I talk about the California sweater. Anything else to say about this? Oh, I didn't even talk about the yarns. Okay, so the yarn combination I used for this, and I guess that also kind of segues into a conversation I had last time where I mentioned if I should start including the cost of projects in terms of yarn, because not a lot of people who are not the smallest size tend to do that. And there was like a really good positive response to that. I think like the majority of the people who commented responding to my question about that said they would love to hear that. So I will be including that from now on, starting with this project. Like I said, I use one strand of fingering and one strand of lace for this sweater. My fingering weight yarn was the Wee County Yarns Kinross 4-ply, which I bought from Ginger Twist Studio in Edinburgh. And let me just see the cost. This is another kind of side note on this. When I was calculating cost, I don't know, I wasn't sure if I should include the cost of the total skein of yarn or just include the cost of the proportion of the skeins that I used. In this case, I did end up doing the latter where I used the proportion of the skeins that I used. But if you think I should just include the cost of the full skeins, because technically I did have to buy the full skeins, let me know in the comments and I will take it into consideration. So I used 2.8 skeins, which cost me 26.6 pounds or about $35.50. And then the Moondrake Fua Fua, which was the lace weight yarn I used for this project, I bought them on sale from Brooklyn General Store for 10% off. And since I used 2.2 skeins, that cost me $83.16. So my total cost for this sweater was $118.66. So that is no small cost, but it is like within my budget for what I want to spend to create a sweater, so I'm okay with that. Furthermore, actually, the Fua Fua that I used, part of it that I used was left over from my tessellated sweater. And I still have 30 grams left over from the initial 4 skeins of Fua Fua that I bought. Also, I have one full skein of Fua Fua in like a purpley color, and then I was thinking of making another Metropolitan Pullover with some light pink Fua Fua that I have in stash, and I'm assuming I would have some left over from that too. And then maybe I could make some sort of colorwork yoke or a scrappy sweater with all these leftovers of Fua Fua that I have in stash. So while the yarn is expensive and those initial 4 skeins that I bought did cost me quite a pretty penny, if I can get 3 sweaters out of that initial purchase, I will be very happy. That's all I have to say about this. The pattern has been released this weekend, so you can go get it and knit it for yourself. I would definitely recommend it. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about, I'm not really sure if it is considered a finished object or a work in progress because I finished 3 individual socks, but they're only half of a pair. And the reason why I did this is because one of my local yarn stores, Yarnia, put out a sock bingo board for the summer where each square represented like a different sock technique. There could have been one square that's toe up, one square was try a new heel, one square was knit some lace, etc., etc. You get what I'm talking about. And that just really pushed me out of my sock knitting comfort bubble, which is 9-inch circulars, cuff down, 2x2 rib, heel flop and gusset. That's usually what I do when it comes to socks. And because I wanted to get a bingo and wanted to complete the board, which I did, I tried a lot of different sock techniques that I have not tried in the past. And here are all the socks that I knit this summer. Like, ignore that little serum. I had to keep it in so the socks would not fall out of the box. But the phone is ringing. Okay, the phone stopped ringing. What was I saying? I think I was just sharing. So here are my box of socks from the summer. And since my last podcast, I have finished 3 socks. Here is sock number 1. I think last time I had basically finished a sock tube with the toe. With the toe, and I had to put in an afterthought heel. So my initial plan was to look for some afterthought heel patterns where you add some sort of gusset to add additional space to the heel, but I just couldn't find one that was easy to follow. Like, they just all seemed kind of finicky, and when it comes to socks, I want to keep it as simple as possible. So I instead just followed Crazy Sock Lady's Afterthought Heel tutorial on YouTube, which I do recommend, and every time I've knit afterthought socks, I follow her video. So I did add 6 plain rounds to this heel before starting the decreases, and it helped, but it's still not quite deep enough for my foot. What I think I'm going to do next time, so when you knit an afterthought heel, you pick up the same number of stitches that you used for like the circumference of the sock, which in this sock was 60 stitches. So I picked up 60 stitches. So next time I'm thinking that I will pick up maybe 4 to 6 additional stitches, and that should help with the depth of the heel, which is my biggest issue. But besides for that, I am happy with this sock. The sock yarn I used for this is Tiny Human Knits Seconds Skein in their Ponyo colorway, which I think is really, really pretty. The self-striping sock was so fun to knit. I knit like 75% of it in one day, and it wasn't even like a day where I was just bed rotting and knitting. I was actually out and about, and socks are just the perfect portable project for that. So that is sock number 1. Sock number 2 that I finished is my first lace sock. Better and worse than I initially expected. So this is the Rapunzel sock from 52 Weeks of Socks, Volume 2. It was better than expected because the lace really wasn't that difficult. Like, once I figured out what I was doing, it was pretty smooth sailing. Also because I knit a relatively short leg and the lace is only on the back of the leg, there wasn't too much lace knitting to do. Like, I was able to get it done in an afternoon. I guess the bad part of it is that there were quite a few errors in the pattern. And that's kind of my general complaint with line of books, and I don't think I've ever tried knitting any of the patterns from the magazine, but just from my experience, I kind of would assume the same, that they have a lot of mistakes, which is kind of frustrating because I feel like most indie designers don't have that many mistakes in their patterns, and when they do, they're pretty minor. Yeah, I don't know if it's just like the rate, like the timeline for publishing the patterns, they just don't have enough time to like properly tech edit and test knit the patterns or what, but I do find it frustrating how common it is to find errors in their pattern. I mean, the corrections are published, but it's just kind of annoying that if I'm knitting a pattern from a book, that before I start, I have to check if there's errors, because the assumption is that I'm working under is like, okay, there are going to be errors, you know? So that's my complaint about that. As far as the yarn goes, this is La Aimee Merino Super Soft Sock, something like that. It's just their regular sock yarn in the shade Sorry, and I think this color is so beautiful. I think my camera's kind of blowing it out, so I'll probably try to insert some b-roll footage. But I love how rich the color is and saturated it is, but you can still see like the tonality of the hand-dyed yarn, and it's just perfect in my eyes. Another thing about this sock I forgot to mention is that I did add a tabby toe because I thought it would look really cute with my tabbies. For this tabby toe, I did follow a different pattern from my last tabby sock, and I think I like the fit of this one a little bit better. It's a little bit more spacious, and this pattern was free, so it is also linked in my Ravelry project page for this sock, so you can find it there. And then I had to do one last sock to check off a bunch of squares in my sock bingo. So I'm calling this my Frankenstein sock. It's like a scrappy little Frankenstein sock. So it was my first time knitting a full sock on 2 circulars, which is kind of finicky. It honestly reminds me of Magic Loop, but a little bit more annoying because you have like these extra needle tips hanging around. But aside from that, it was fine. And then I also needed to knit some cables and some crochet. So I added some baby cables right up in the ribbing because I really do not enjoy knitting cables in socks. But I wanted to check off the box, so I literally just cabled like 6 of the rib stitches, and I think it's a cute detail, and I would actually do it again because it's literally just 1 row of cabling. Even a cable sock hater can tolerate that. And then I also crocheted on a little heart with surface crochet. So it is actually crooked, but that's okay because it's really cute, and I totally want to surface crochet more things now, like socks, mittens. It could even be like little details on like the sleeves of a sweater. I think the potential is endless, and I'm glad that I tried give it a try and that it came out cute. So that is the end of my socks. I do have some like, I guess, final thoughts on this sock bingo experience, whatever. I'm really happy I did it. I think it was a lot of fun, and if they do it again, I will totally participate, and I would suggest you participating as well because you don't have to be local to participate. Everything is online, and I did learn quite a bit while filling up my board. I tried out new techniques that I learned that I like I do like lace socks. They're not as intimidating as I thought, and I totally want to knit more in the future. I don't know if I'm ready for a lace garment because I know the second you make a mistake in lace, if you don't have a lifeline, you're kind of screwed, and I find inserting lifelines kind of really tedious. So no lace garments in my future, but totally lace socks. Number 2 is DK Socks Rock. They knit up so fast. They're so squishy. They're the perfect house socks, and I totally want to make more as gift knits. Number 3 is I don't mind toe-up socks, and I really love Flegel heels, both the knitting of it and the fit of it. So the next time I knit a toe-up sock, I'm totally going to do the Flegel heel. I don't think I have anything else to say about that. I am glad that this bingo board kind of kickstarted my sock mojo because I lost it in March after knitting 1 cabled sock. And yeah, I still have to knit. I have to finish that second sock, but every time I knit on it, like my will to knit just is like drained. And it kind of sucks that I have knit 4 single socks, but I still have to knit the second sock. I'm not going to think about knitting the second sock anytime soon because I'm hoping that maybe like later on in the year, if I want to knit a sock, having the 1 sock done is kind of like motivation. Like, oh, I just have to knit 1 sock and then I have a pair instead of casting on a new sock. But my next sock will be a new cast on because like I said, I'm going to kind of like keep these in the back burner for later in the fall and winter when I want to knit a sock and need some motivation. I don't know if those were works in progress or finished objects or both. But now we can move on to my proper work in progress. And my proper work in progress is my Rhinebeck sweater. This is a very heavily modified, how do I hold this? Okay, maybe I do this. You can see the color work. This is a very heavily modified Orkney sweater by Marie Wallen. So this sweater is written as a bottom-up sweater, and I initially said that it was a steeked sweater, but for reasons unknown to me, it is not steeked. I don't really understand why, because all of the colorwork motifs are very, very short, classic Fair Isle colorwork charts, and I feel like Fair Isle sweaters are typically steeked, especially cardigans. So that did not make much sense to me. So my initial plan was basically to do the same thing I'm doing with my frame sweater, which was redo the bottom up pattern and just kind of like rewrite it or follow it in reverse to be top down. I tried that and it just was not working out. And I actually also tried looking at the maple sweater, which is another pattern by Marie Wallen, which has a similar look to it, except the body uses intarsia instead of stranded colorwork, or I think it's a combination of intarsia and stranded colorwork. Lo and behold, when I read that pattern, it's basically the exact same pattern as the Orkney sweater, just the colorwork charts are different, but the construction is absolutely the same. And I've never knit any Marie Wallen patterns before, and I guess because I'm very unfamiliar with her writing style, a lot of the parts were kind of like confusing to me. For instance, there was one section that was like, knit until you have 10 stitches on your right needle. And it took me a minute to realize that literally just means knit 10 stitches. Like the addition of on your right needle threw me off, because I was like looking at it, flipping my work back and forth. I was like, wait, my numbers aren't adding up. And then I realized, wait, no, that literally just means knit 10 stitches. The writing style was not for me. And then also the way that the sweater is constructed is there's a lot of, since it's bottom up, there's a lot of large chunks of decreases. And if you've ever knit a sweater like that, I feel like it creates like a step laddery kind of look to it. It's basically not my favorite construction. I definitely prefer short row shaping. And because I was not like particularly tied to the fit of the sweater, it was mostly the color work that interested me. I decided after attempting to knit this, I cast it on twice in this way. I decided, okay, I'm not gonna do that. So I went on Ravelry and I looked for set-in sleeve sweaters that were knit top down, and the set-in sleeve was knit completely separate from the body. That doesn't mean that the stitches are not picked up, but a lot of set-in sleeve construction, especially more modern patterns, you are knitting part of the sleeve cap as you're knitting the body. I think like a lot of petite knit sweaters are like that. But because I'm using a completely different stitch pattern on the sleeve as compared to the body, that just wouldn't work for me. So finally I settled on the Sunshine Tee by Andrea Gaughan. It is a fingering weight sweater pattern that she released this summer. It's set-in sleeve, top down, perfectly fit the bill for me. All that to say is I've basically been using the Orkney colorwork charts and I've been putting them into the Sunshine Tee. But there has been a lot of math involved because my gauge is, the Sunshine Tee has one gauge, the Orkney sweater has another gauge, and I'm knitting it at a third gauge. And there are a lot of sections in the Sunshine Tee pattern where it says like knit X amount of rows, but because my row gauge is like 10 stitches off of the row gauge of the Sunshine Tee pattern, I've been having to do a lot of math to make sure that I get the correct lengths. And then there's like also different increase rates. So not only am I doing ratios, which is like usual for sweater knitting, I feel like. At least I end up doing a lot of ratios. Maybe because my gauge is like always off. Maybe that's just a me problem. But I also ended up having to do some algebra for this sweater because there's different rates of increases and then I have to adjust like the length. I don't know. Basically, I've been having to do a lot of math, and I think the amount of non-knitting work that has gone into this sweater is basically the same as the amount of knitting work that's gone into this sweater, which is kind of wild, but I'm so enjoying the process. That was a lot of talking about this sweater, but I do have a lot of things to say, and I've been trying to film like little check-ins every few days to share a project vlog once it's over. I may actually end up sharing 2 project vlogs, like splitting it into 2 parts, because otherwise it's going to be really long. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of math. It's not difficult, it's just more like tedious work. I actually think the most difficult part of the sweater project has been figuring out the color placements. So whenever I've knit colorwork projects in the past, I never tend to stick with the first color combination I come up with. Like I'll swatch or I'll start knitting and then I realize, like I don't like it. Either I'll switch out one color or I'll come up with a new combination. You know the drill. With this sweater, I actually did like all of the colors that I picked for the sweater, but my problem was with how you place those colors within the colorwork chart. And because I've never knit Fair Isle, I didn't realize that the color placement is just as important as the actual colors you pick when it comes to the final result of the sweater. And I was struggling with it a lot, and what I ultimately ended up doing, so there was this one pattern. There's this one sweater by Molly Goddard that I've been using as like my color inspiration, and what I ended up doing is recreating the colorwork chart on Stitch Fiddle. And I had a really hard look at this colorwork chart, and I ultimately came to 3 conclusions that helped me so much in making my own colorwork chart. And you may be thinking like, this sweater and your colors have a totally different vibe, and I feel like the original sweater is very much demure and mine is very like loud and obnoxious, but I like my loud and obnoxious colors and I'm sticking with them. Looking at this colorwork chart, I ultimately came up with 3 conclusions that helped me a lot in figuring out the color placement on my own sweater. So number 1 is I like the balance between high contrast and low contrast segments. So with my first chart for the sweater, I made sure that every single motif had high contrast. But when I started knitting it, it honestly just looked like an eyesore. So when I was looking at this chart, I realized, wait, there are actually quite a few sections where there is low contrast and it kind of breaks up those higher contrast sections. And when I looked at the original colors that Marie Wallen used in her Orkney sweater, it was the same thing. There were some motifs that were very low contrast and some motifs that were more high contrast. That was conclusion number 1. Conclusion number 2 is I like the balance you get when you use every single color in the beginning, middle, and end. So initially I was thinking, because I wanted to use a pink as my main color, similar to what they do in this Molly Goddard sweater, I tried to use it as much as possible, and I was afraid that if I used some of the other bright colors too much, that like the pink would just get lost in the sauce and it wouldn't be the main color anymore. But then I realized even you can definitely see by looking at this chart that the pink is the main color, but they still brought balance to the design by using each color in the beginning, middle, and end. Like the green, beginning, middle, end. Blue, beginning, middle, end. Yellow, beginning, middle, end. Red, beginning, middle, end. You get the deal. So that was conclusion number 2. And conclusion number 3 is it looks good to repeat the same color pairings. So I thought that, oh, if I use, for instance, the blue and the green together in one chart, I cannot use it later on in the sweater because it'll just look too repetitive. But then again, when I looked at the Molly Goddard sweater, I realized, no, wait, they totally repeat the same color combinations all throughout the sweater, and it brings some sort of cohesion to the design. All those 3 conclusions in place, I ended up reworking the chart. Actually, I can open up my chart and share it. Okay, so here is my chart, my version, Orkney Sweater Mili's version, as you might say. So here's my chart, and I have kept tweaking the chart to follow like those 3 rules or guidelines that I came up for myself. And I'm sure as I continue knitting, maybe I'll reach another motif where I'm like, let me switch out this color for another, and that's totally okay. Another thing I realized with Fair Isle sweaters, you just have to embrace ripping back, frogging. It's part of the process, especially as I've never knit a Fair Isle project before. But overall, I'm really happy with the way that my chart is looking and the way that my sweater is looking. I actually had to chart out the whole front yoke of the sweater because, like I said, there's like a lot of math involved, and also I did not want there to be a jog where I'm joining the front yoke to the back yoke. So yeah, I had to chart it all out to make sure that did not happen. And I guess the other major modification I made to the sweater is that the sunshine tee is just a pullover, and I do want this to be a cardigan. I followed the yoke as a pattern is written with my own stitch count with the color work added, and then there's a step where you join the front and right shoulders, and I cast on those stitches, and then I added 5 extra stitches to be my sticking stitches. And like the same thing that I'm doing with my Ava cardigan, the outer stitches are purl stitches and the center stitches are knit stitches, and the plan is to cut through those center knit stitches and then fold over on the purl stitches. So this has definitely been a labor of love, but it's been so fun. And I know my colors are really not traditional Fair Isle colors, but it's obnoxious but fun, and I'm okay with that. As far as the yarn that I'm using, it's a whole mix of stuff. Some yarn that I bought during the New Jersey Wool Walk, some yarn that I bought while I was in Europe, and then I have one skein of yarn that is a leftover from a previous sweater knitting project. This is, I think, Pearl Soho knitting yarn. It's quite a plump DK yarn, and I forgot about this, and I really, really like it, and I totally want to knit another cabled sweater in this yarn because it is a very, very plump 4-ply, and you get excellent stitch definition. So that was my side note on this. I then did have to go buy 2 new skeins of yarn because I didn't have the proper colors in stash. So this is Juniper Moon Farms Patagonia. This is a pinky color. I think this is shade Bubblegum. And then I also bought a red, which is on the table over there. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say on the Orkney sweater for now. That was a lot of talking. And because I have been hyper focusing on this and then previously hyper focusing on the Metropolitan Pullover, I haven't made any other progress on my other sweater whips from last episode. So the framed sweater, the Norfolk sweater, and the Ava cardigan have not been touched. But hopefully that will change before the next podcast episode. The Norfolk sweater will definitely be done because it's a test knit, and then Ava cardigan I would like to be further along because I want to steek that before I steek this, because this is definitely a lot more work. So if I mess things up, I'd rather mess it up on the Ava cardigan. I mean, I'd rather not mess it up on any of them, but if I had to pick one to mess up on, it would be the Ava cardigan. I actually do have one other sweater whip that I've been working on. It is a sort of freehanded raglan sweater in Bouclé yarn. This is the yarn in question. This is Explore Knits and Fibers Bouclé in their grapefruit colorway. The reason I cast this on is because Explore Knits and Fibers announced, I think at the end of August, that they will be coming to Brooklyn General Store for the New York City Yarn Crawl, and I thought it would be fun to wear a Explore Knits and Fibers sweater to the yarn crawl. And I'm loosely following the step-by-step sweater by Handmade by Florence, but I'm knitting it at like a different gauge with different needle size. I basically cast on for a size, I think 3 sizes up from the size that I made last time with 4.5mm needles. And I followed the shorter shaping, and now I'm just doing raglan increases and just trying it on to see how big I want the yoke to be. So the pattern is like really easy to follow. Definitely recommend it if you've never knit a sweater before. My problem with this project is the yarn. I've never knit with Bouclé yarn before, and it was definitely an Instagram that made me buy it purchase because I just saw so many people on Instagram talking about Bouclé yarn, and a lot of dyers were coming out with Bouclé yarn, and I thought this color was really fun, so I bought it last summer. Now that I have started knitting it a year later, I really do not like Bouclé yarn. I love the way it looks and it's really soft, but the knitting experience is just not enjoyable for me. Bouclé yarn has essentially like no give to it. Like if I do this, like, do you see how there's, oops, I don't want to rip it. There's like literally no bounce to it. It's very, very stiff. It reminds me a lot of knitting with cotton or other plant fibers, and that's kind of like the whole reason why I don't knit with cotton and plant fibers, is because there's no elasticity and it ends up hurting my hands. The workaround for this for me has been to switch my knitting styles. I primarily knit English style, but when I knit continental, my gauge loosens up a lot. And at a looser gauge, this does hurt my hands less. But the downside of knitting at a looser gauge is the fabric just gets really, really airy. So this is the right side of the fabric, and it almost looks like ribbing to me. And then the wrong side of the fabric, I think you get more of that true bouclé texture. Like you can even see in the fabric how in the beginning it's more dense because I was knitting English style, and then towards the bottom it's really loosey-goosey because of my continental knitting. I do like the way that the fabric looks when it's denser, but it's just too painful for me to knit a whole sweater that way, so I'm just sticking with the loosey-goosey fabric. And that was one thing I was kind of contemplating when I first started the sweater, because I cast it on 4.5mm needles, and I was like, this fabric is so dense, like it hurts my hands. How are people knitting it on 3.75mm needles? Because when I was looking on Ravelry, that seemed to be the most popular like needle size for people knitting sweaters with this project, at least like the projects I was looking at. I just don't think I can knit it at that tight a gauge. Like I'm sure the fabric looks really nice, but in terms of like knitting experience and like my hand health, I don't think I could do it. I'm just hoping for this to be like a very casual, cozy, sweatshirty kind of vibe sweater. Since I didn't buy any coordinating wool in this color because I bought it in an in-stock update. I have been a little bit worried about what I'm going to do for like the neckline and ribbing and stuff, because I don't think ribbing would look good in this textured yarn. But one of the yarns that I'm using in my Orkney sweater actually does coordinate with this. So I don't know how much yarn I'll have left over. So maybe I could try doing like I-cord finishes on this sweater, because I am going for like a more casual vibe. As is, I don't think the stockinette fabric is curling up as much as it usually would, maybe because of the bouclé texture. Another thing I've been considering is I do really like Explore Knits yarns, and I do really want to see their colors in person, especially because they said they are designing 6 shades for the yarn crawl or like the pop-up or whatever. But whenever I've seen like other people attend Explore Knits and Fibers events like in the past, like at Flock or what's that store, La Mercerie, it seems like they get really long lines. Like people like camp out beforehand to go, and I don't know if I have the patience. No, I know I don't have the patience to wait in line for yarn like that. So we'll see if I end up going. Maybe if I go later in the day, it will be a little less hectic. But also, will there even be any yarn left? I'll have to see what colors they announce that they're bringing, and then determine my plans. I hope I can get this done before then, but like I'm not gonna give myself wrist pain trying to get it done. Like if it was a regular wool sweater, I could 100% get it done. But this bouclé is not my vibe. Okay, that is it for whips. I don't really have any acquisitions because I already told you the 2 yarns that I have bought in the past 3 weeks are already being used in my Orkney sweater. My other semi-acquisition is a library book. So this is 52 Weeks of Socks, Volume 2. The Rapunzel socks that I knit were from this book. Yeah, I think it just has a lot of really beautiful patterns. I really like the colorwork socks that are on the back cover, and I'm hoping to knit at least like 1 or 2 more pairs of socks before I have to return at the library. If you do not want to commit to buying a huge knitting book, definitely check out your local library because they may have more than you expect. And also a lot of local libraries allow you, at least like in the US that I'm familiar with, you can put in requests for books that they don't carry. So if they don't carry this book, maybe you can put in a request and they will get it for you. And then I guess in terms of future knitting plans, I'm mostly just focusing on the projects that are on my needles. I'm really determined to keep working on my Orkney sweater. It still has my interest. This Explore Knits and Fibers sweater hopefully will be done by the end of the month. And then the Norfolk sweater will 100% be done. I just have to finish my second sleeve. I think my next proper cast on will be another sock from this book. It is the Tallulah Texture Cardigan by Meepy the Label. I bought this while I was in London. It is Filcolana Pernilla in the, I'll put the colorway name on the screen. It just says 196, but it's a pretty palish yellow. So I did initially buy this to make a dupe of this Sandy Liang sweater, but the more I looked at that sweater, the more I think I need to use an even paler yellow than this. And I think the Sandnes Garn Tin Silk Mohair and Tin Peer Gynt in this really light color, or maybe it's the Sunday and the Tin Silk Mohair. I don't know, but I remember when I was at the store, I was looking at different yellows, and because I was concerned about luggage weight, I didn't want to get a mohair and a fingering weight yarn because it would take up more space, I thought, than just getting a DK weight yarn. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't really think that's true, and I should have just gotten that. But alas, we are here. I am here with a sweater quantity of this yellow yarn. So I'm thinking I might try swatching for this textured cardigan in this yarn to see if I can gauge. Okay, so that is the end of the knitting portion of this video. In the next segment, I will talk about my sewing finished object, but if you don't want to watch that, thank you so much for watching up to this point. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please feel free to give it a like and follow along, and I hope to see you again next time. Happy knitting. Bye. And for those of you who want to hear me talk about my sewing finished object, this is the picnic set. So the set actually comes with a dress that I'm wearing and bloomers, which I'm not wearing. And the pattern is by, I don't remember the designer's name off the top of my head. Her name will be on the screen. And I actually test sewed this project, and it was my first time test sewing. And I actually learned so much from the experience. The group chat was really chatty, and there was a lot of people who had so much more experience than me, and I feel like I learned a lot from like the suggestions that they had made to the pattern maker. I think it was just a very good experience as a beginner sewist. That said, I did struggle a bit with the pattern. This is technically my third version. So the first time I sewed it exactly as written in the pattern because I was testing it. And then there were some parts that I was unhappy with, not because of the pattern, but because of my own limitations as a beginner sewer. So I ripped it out and I redid it, and then I had a pretty good understanding of the pattern then. So I bought some new fabric and I made version 3 with some modifications to make it easier on myself. And I'm so happy with this final version. It's so comfortable and cute, and I've been wearing it a lot. I posted some pictures of me wearing it on Instagram, so those will be on the screen at some point. The pattern really is beginner friendly. It is the same back and front, depending on the version that you make. So there's 3 different versions for the dress, and there's 2 different versions for the bloomers. I made version B for every version that I made version B all 3 times that I sewed this dress. But I totally want to make version C next time because I do intend on making more of this pattern because it's just so cute. And I really like version C, which has like a ruffly collar added to it, and I want to make my next version with long sleeves. So the modifications I made to this version to make it easier for me as a beginner sewist. My biggest confusion with this pattern was the buttonholes. So I have never sewn buttonholes before, so I thought that actual like physical step of sewing the buttonholes would be difficult, but it's completely not. Like, the sewing machine does all the work for you. It's easy peasy. Where I struggled with is I didn't understand the instructions for where you place the buttonhole, but after some like back and forth in the chat and actually doing it for the first time, I finally understood after I did it where it was supposed to go. Alas, I did it incorrectly the first time, and once you sew in and cut a buttonhole, it's kind of just like there forever. So that's why on my first version, I put that incorrect buttonhole on the back, and that's kind of a little wonky. But the good news is, since I understood it, I could make it for the third version, and I did do it right here. But what I changed is, so there's like this, I don't know what to call it. There's like this folded over section of fabric where you put in your elastic and your ties, and I just made that wider because I just found that easier. Modification number 2 is I skipped the pockets on this version. I have never sewn pockets before, so in my first version, they just came out kind of wonky because I didn't align them properly, and they were kind of sticking out on the edges, and it was bothering me a lot. So I just skipped it on this version. I also made these straps a little wider because turning the fabric inside out was really difficult for me, and there were also a lot of sections where I struggled with making the finishings look clean. So I bought a serger for my birthday, and there were some sections like the end of the ties where I just finished it with a serged edge, and I think it I feel like it fits the vibe of the fabric that I picked, so I'm totally okay with that. And like also the bottom of the dress, I just left the serged edge. Overall, I'm really happy with the dress. I learned a lot while making it. I want to make it again, and I would totally recommend it. And the bloomers are also so cute. I do want to revisit my version that I made and kind of do the same thing where I remake them, learn what went wrong the first time, and then improve upon it to make a new version. I think a version of the bloomers where you add like lace to the bottom would be so cute. I've also been thinking, so there's like the tie in the middle here. I was thinking of making a version with a dress where there's also ties on the sleeve because I think that'd be such a cute detail. Okay, so now we truly are at the end of this video. I've talked about all my sewing and my knitting over the past 3 weeks. I think 3 weeks is kind of like the sweet spot for me. My previous episodes were either like every few months or like every like 5 to 6 weeks, and it just got to be too much information. So I like this length, and I hope you do too. So my next video will be my fall knitting plans with stash yarn based on like the inspiration I created on my fall mood board. So that wraps this up. As always, please feel free to share what is on your needles or what you are working on while watching this video, because I'm nosy and I always love to know that. Literally every single video I'm finding like new patterns to add to my favorites that I then want to knit. So thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, feel free to give it a like and follow along. Happy knitting. Hope to see you again next time. Bye.